book review on video. This time, Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. My copy here is in Norwegian, but I'm going to talk about it in English because I think it's such a wonderful book, such an important book. Everyone ought to read it, and obviously more people will understand what I'm saying about it if I do it in English. And it's, of course, easily available, I'd say, in any country in the West from good bookstores. Because, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, this is a big success, award-winning. It's also been made into a motion picture, which I very much recommend. It's done in the same style of black and white, and with the same type of drawings as the book. And it's really a very unusual animated movie and very moving, fascinating movie. I recommend that too. But of course the book goes into more depth. It's a really thick book, a graphic novel of about 350 pages. It's autobiographical. Satrapi basically tells the story of her life, which could have been harsher, obviously. I mean, she suffers less than a lot of the people in her story, actually. But at the same time, she certainly goes through enough. The book starts with her childhood. She grows up in Tehran. She's an only child. Her parents are what you could describe as doting. They spoil her to some extent. Her grandmother as well spoils her a bit. But she's a very intelligent child, and they treat her very respectfully. You know, they talk to her, perhaps beyond her years, but they don't conceal reality from her, and they educate her as much as they can. Her parents are really wonderful people, and she has experiences at school and in the playground that through small scenes reveal a lot about Iranian society of the time. And of course, eventually in 1979 the revolution arrives. Satrapi was born in, let's see, 1969. So she and Margie, the character in the book, are about 10 when the revolution breaks out. And it's a pretty terrible time. A lot of things happen, a lot of things go wrong, and things don't turn out the way the average Iranian citizen want, because, as we all know, the revolution leads to a different kind of dictatorship. Margie's parents decide to send her to Europe to study because they feel that the way the schools are going, with a lot of basically the staples of education are being more and more condemned as being too Western, being too irreligious, too secular. Her parents feel that the education she's getting in Tehran isn't good enough, and she's also being almost a bit mentally destroyed by being in Tehran because everything is so limited. So when she's, I think, 14, she actually travels to Austria, to Vienna, to go to school there. And she spent some years in Vienna and has a lot of out-of-the-box experiences, really, that really challenge her and that really shape her very strongly as a human being. So that when she finally returns to Iran, she's a very different Margie from the person who left, and she's also very different from her peers who have been in Iran the whole time. And she goes back to school in Tehran, finishes her studies, she meets a man, she gets married. But everything has changed, and something that the book shows really well is the futility of trying to hold on to something, of trying to force the world to be in a certain way, just because that's the way you want it to be. And like Margie and her friends do, they have secret parties, they live a life that is pretty close to the life they want in a society that doesn't accept that life. And you can only do that for so long before reality is going to catch up to you, which it does for Margie and for many of her friends. And there are a lot of really hard stories in this book, both from Margie's family. We hear in more or less flashbacks occasionally about people in her family, her grandfather, so on, in situations where she's being told by her parents and her grandmother part of their family's history. And there are harsh stories about things that happen to people in her family and in her circle of friends. And it's a comic book, but it's not a light read. And although it certainly has its funny scenes, it's overall kind of a human tragedy, a tragedy of the human spirit, because these people, they, a lot of them suffer for something that it appears to me really only a minority would want. The majority are more interested in personal freedom, but because of the way their society is structured, those at the top are able to enforce their will on the entire nation. And there is, I hesitate to use the word brainwashing, I'm not sure I believe in that concept, but people are really force-fed propaganda from the regime to such an extent that they begin to believe the strangest things. There is one scene in which a man is taken from hospital, his body is taken from hospital, and he's going to be celebrated as a martyr for the cause. The king is a murderer. This poor man died for the cause. And the widow tries to step in, saying that her husband is not a martyr. He died from cancer. Obviously not, as these people are trying to make out, fighting against the forces of the Shah. But they tell her that, oh, that's nothing to worry about, he was a martyr, he was a hero, and she eventually starts walking the parade with them, saying that the king is a murderer, the king is a murderer. So people really can be made to believe the strangest things. And that's a pretty funny scene. And a lot of the funny scenes in this book are like that, really dark humor. But overall, we're seeing a very important piece of history, part of history, through the eyes of an intelligent and thoughtful young girl, the young woman. And it is so interesting. You learn so much about Iranian society, about Iranian modern history, and I just can't recommend this book enough. I'm going to give it 10 stars on Book Crossing. This, again, is the Book Crossing book. It's just something I think everyone should read, because a lot of us here in the West, we think that all Muslims are the same. Everyone from that part of the world, they're all the same. Yeah, maybe they are, but if so, then we're all the same. And this book really shows us how much we have in common. And the writing is wonderful. This is an excellently translated book, by the way. The drawings are fantastic. They're so striking and so expressive, even though they're so extremely simple. It's just a beautiful piece of work on every level. Gives so much insight, and it's very emotional and gripping. Again, I cannot recommend this book enough.